Yeah, hello and welcome back to Muji XA, your favorite channel to eat food too. And in excitement for a brand new day, I decided to make a video on the many and numerous clones of Spider-Man. Over the years, Peter has had a lot of clones, and I wanted to just break them down, my favorite ones, and lob some critique their way. But before I begin, I want you to hit that like button and subscribe and comment if you enjoyed the video. So, let's begin. Peter Benjamin Parker is the OG, the template of Spider-Man, and in this house, Peter Parker will always be Spider-Man. A love child of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, he was created at a time when Timely Comics was shutting down a comic line known as Amazing Fantasy and essentially was given the last issue for them to do, whatever. And with that decision, Spider-Man was born. Created at a time where Marvel went against the grain and made a teenage superhero that wasn't a sidekick as well as a masked individual, which essentially shot up to unprecedented levels of popularity. Though with this popularity and years upon years of serialization, this will eventually lead to stagnation, which would lead them to creating spin-off characters naturally. That's right, we're talking about the Clone Saga, people, one of the most controversial storylines of the Amazing Spider-Man. Conceived in the 90s, and it's a very convoluted storyline, I'll just give you the broad strokes of the basics. Peter and Gwen are cloned by a very odd fellow named Miles Warren, better known as the Jackal. Why I mention Gwen is important as well. At this point in time, Gwen was dead, so we are thrown for a loop. Peter and the clone fight and an explosion happens, and the ending is left ambiguous as to who lives, Peter or the clone. Which brings us to phase 2 of the Clone Saga, when the convolution begins. And the clone returns and has taken on the name Ben Reilly and his own superhero moniker, the Scarlet Spider. In that same saga, another clone pops up, the original unstable clone, Kaine Parker. The story now pivots and says Peter is the clone and Ben Reilly is the original. Then they retired Peter from Spider-Man because Mary Jane was pregnant with Mayday. This was an editorial decision that eventually was walked back because, as we all know, Marvel hates drastic status quo changes. So, I want to talk about each of the Spider-Man clone and their contributions to the legacy and mythos of Spider-Man. Ben Reilly was the first replacement for Spider-Man in the 90s. He was extreme! He wore a hoodie and he had cartridges on the outside with a utility belt. Scarlet Spider was one of the most 90s design ever. I'm definitely gonna have to do a video about the most 90s designs on Marvel and DC, but anyway, eventually Ben did move on to becoming a Spider-Man replacement. He dyes his hair blonde, wears his own Spider-Man costume and has his own love interest and everything. Hell, Buddy became a writer for a cafe called The Daily Grind, which is kind of way worse than becoming a photographer for Spider-Man, but how does Buddy consistently slip away? But his run was okay, I guess. He bonded with the Carnage symbiotes. OGs who watched the 90s Spider-Man show would definitely recognize Spider Carnage. Eventually, all made things come to an end and the status quo must be restored. Peter comes back as Spider-Man and Ben is killed off. Years later, Ben is resurrected as a villain, becoming the new Jackal in order to differentiate him further from Peter. It's revealed that he had died and come back multiple times, and it fractured his mind, and he eventually becomes an anti-hero with this thing of a suit and a more Deadpool-y type of personality. They made him Deadpool without the guns and the fourth wall break. His mental state is fixed and he does replace Peter briefly and returns to being Spider-Man, but again very briefly before his memories are then wiped again and he becomes a villain known as Chasm. Hope you guys are beginning to see a pattern here. He is currently pretending to be Peter again, and I'll address the devil dinosaur in the room. Marvel legitimately do not know what to do with this character. From inception, his intended purpose was to replace Peter and Spider-Man, and he wasn't even allowed to do that. So he just generally lingers around. Hero, villain, anti-hero. but the reality is that he's just a relic of an era who has outlived his purpose, which brings me to the next dude. Kaine was the original clone of Peter Parker, albeit he was a lot more unstable, unlike Ben. He aged rapidly in the beginning, his skin was essentially falling off, and he was a lot more aggressive and mentally unstable. However, this was a recipe for a lot of interesting character growth and development. Initially going by the villain name of Spider-Side, just look at this edgy nonsense, I beg. He was the secondary antagonist of the Clone Saga. However, by the end of it, he fell more into the anti-hero category, where he kind of moved around being less of a replacement for Peter rather than an aggressive brother that occasionally popped in. Eventually, he does die in place of Peter during the event of Grim Hunt. This is when Kraven's family attempted to resurrect Kraven the Hunter, who had been dead for a while due to the event of Kraven's last hunt. Kaine sacrifices himself and wears Peter's suit and is used in a ritual to resurrect Kraven. However, due to the fact that he was a clone and unstable, Kraven also came back unstable. Kaine would return as Tarantula during the event of Spider Island as a heavily mutated hulking monster. But by the end of that story, he is cured and he assumes the mantle of Scarlet Spider. I'm not gonna lie, this suit is clean. It's clean as hell, man. It's clean. And he had a whole host of powers that differentiated him from Peter, such as his retractable talons from his fist, precognitive spider senses, that is essentially spider sense on steroids. He could communicate with spiders, and my favorite ability is this biblical and badass thing called the Mark of Cain, where he just puts his fingers on your face and just takes your face off. He is my Scarlet Spider, and he was given the solo series and the tagline, all of the power, none of the responsibility. Kaine eventually does join the superhero team, the New Warriors, which is a super underrated team, by the way, and here's hoping they get some shine someday. And Kaine gets some time to shine even more in the event of Spider-Verse, where he has the role of the Other, which deserves an entire video in of itself. Kaine has had more growth and development in his stints as a Spider-Man clone, as well as growing into a character of his own rather than a half-baked or replacement character of Spider-Man. And in case you can't tell, I have a Kaine agenda. I clearly do. Give me back my solo series. I'm tired of, you people throwing him around. Give me back my boy. And that's about it for the biological clones. Hold on. I said I was only going to do 616. Well, I lied. I'll briefly talk about the Ultimate Universe clones, which I kind of like their implementation. The Ultimate clones were less replacements of Peter and more replacements of other characters such as Tarantula, Scorpion, that's right, Scorpion. In the Ultimate Universe, it was a clone of Peter. And finally, the most interesting clone in this entire segment could have just been dedicated to Ultimate Spider-Woman Jessica Drew. Remember how I said I liked their implementation? Well, Jess is the one I'm talking about specifically. This is a female clone of Peter, having all of Peter's memories, and is the Scarlet Spider character of this universe. Created to be a spy for the CIA, Jess's memories of Peter eventually fade, having very little connection to Peter and growing into being her own person, and even mentors Miles for a while joining the Ultimates and becoming the leader of the all-new Ultimates, as well as the new Black Widow, after I'd rather not speak on Ultimate Natasha. Ugh, the less said about that, the better. But she does pop back up in the Spider-Verse, sporting a new look, but man, I really like the classic Scarlet costume. And honestly speaking, while I'm not a huge fan of moving over Ultimate characters such as Miles and his adjacent cast, Jessica should have been ported alongside them because she genuinely had so much to offer as a character. Anyway, That's it for today's video. Is there any clone you really like and I didn't talk about? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And there will definitely be a part 2 to this video where I talk about the thematic clones of Spider-Man, not the, physical, biological ones. But yeah, that's it for today's video, and stay frosty.
Love and peace,